Hi guys, Thom Hunt here in the kit room, and today's subject is going to be around these beauties. All right, this is the Westin SWIM, known as a jerkbait, known as a glide bait. Very, very interesting. If anyone's out there that follows my channel, you may have heard of some of the podcasts or interviews I've done recently, talking with people, and I said this was one of my aims of this year. So from about kind of December, January time, I was really wanting to spend a lot of time fishing these baits. It wasn't a confidence bait for me. I knew that they were superb baits. I kind of knew the theory of how to use them, and I'd caught fish on them before, but I just didn't have that confidence. And the only way to get confidence is go out there, take these baits. I was only taking these baits at times. I'm really forcing myself to have to learn, what depths do they go to, what's the best equipment to use them on, to use wire, to use fluorocarbon, what depths do they go down to, all of that sort of stuff. All right, so I just wanted to get into a few tips today of retrievals, little bit about color, little bit about when I would use them. But again, if anyone's, we're all learning, and I'm learning just as much as you guys. So if anyone's got any tips out there on when they find the best time to use these types of baits, they're a classic shape. There's quite a few brands out there that have got similar-ish kind of shapes, much more heavily loaded depth-wise at the head. Going back, they've got very, very flat sides. I see there's guys all over Europe that are hand making these out of wood, custom painting them, but generally they're all roughly the same shape, roughly the same kind of action. So the Westin SWIM is the one that I've been using, but if you've got one out in your box that you haven't used for a while, hopefully there's a few tips in this video, and I'm pretty sure it'll be applicable to the ones that are in your box, even if it isn't these ones. So let's start. So I started in the winter. The water was still quite cold, but it was getting up to that kind of January-ish time when the fish are looking to put their last bit of condition on. They're getting their bodies ready for spawning, and they're looking to start coming up shallow to spawn in kind of February and March a lot of the time. So I was getting out there, and there's first thing to say is check the sink rate. All right, so in the Westin range we do 3 different types of sink rate. We do what's called low floating, we do suspending, and then we do sinking. Now low floating is actually a floating version, all right, but once you've got a clip and a swivel and a wire trace on there, it will become a true suspending bait, but a very shallow bait. The suspending version we do is very, very good at suspending, and once you've got a small wire trace on, or your fluorocarbon or whatever it might be ever so slightly sinking, but it's very, very kind of suspending. So low floating version, difficult to fish deeper than about 2 foot. Suspending version, difficult to fish more than, I'd say, 2 to 3 and a bit foot. But if I'm honest, the most versatile one in the range that we've got is the sinking version. All right, I can fish it. It doesn't sink like a stone, so I can still fish it in that 0 to 2 to 3 foot range without having to put a huge amount of pace on the lure. I'm just plopping it out there, might be a count of 1 or so, then I just start working the lure. And it's absolutely cracking over the top of weeds or in shallow water. But also this sinking version, if I do just give it a few, a 4 count, a 5 count, I can get it down to that 4 foot zone, 6 foot zone. And potentially, if I had thin enough braid on and I was just fishing it, paying attention, I could probably fish these down to about 8 foot. But really, I'd say, they're a shallow bait to start with. You will catch in deep-ish water, but I typically wouldn't fish these more than in about 15 feet of water unless I knew that the fish were roaming around suspended, feeding on bait balls up in the water. I just find that it's one of those methods that those pike, they're often in and around the weeds, wanting to kind of ambush prey, and this is a perfect bait to be coming over the top of their heads. Visually, it's very attractive. The profile is fantastic. It's the type of bait that I want to be fishing above the line of sight because it's got such an amazing profile and a very visual kind of action to it. All right, so I wouldn't be fishing more than about 15 foot, and if I was fishing 15 foot, I would be looking to try and probably get it down to 6 or 8 foot, unless I knew those pike were really up in the water, and they're often only up in the water for a few reasons, and that's because they're around hunting. So that's only when I'm seeing fry that are just below the surface, or bait fish below the surface, or I might be seeing them on my fish finder. Other than that, I really kind of want to be fishing 3 foot deep, 4 foot deep in 6 foot of water, 4 foot deep, 5 foot deep in 8 foot of water. You know, I don't want to be fishing these very deep. So 90% of the time I'm fishing these in 1 to 10 foot, and then the last 10% I might be in slightly deeper water. But that's the first thing to say, is these are shallow water baits, all right? You won't get them hugely deep. I know some guys actually put extra kind of lead clips that can go onto the front, you know, like almost like little sort of drop shot weights that twist onto the front. But for me, it really starts to kill the action. Have tried it, kills the action, and just arguably, I think I would outfish you on a different style lure if you were trying to get this one down more than kind of, you know, 15, 20 foot of water. I just don't think that they're not designed for that, and they don't work as well at that. They don't shine in that situation. So let's talk about retrieve. So a typical example for me will be coming through into that spring when everything's warming up, little bit of weed growth. That's when these really start to shine. All right. So say I'm bank fishing, I'm on a gravel pit. Often I'm in my waders, I'm just getting out past that bankside vegetation, so I'm into the water. Gravel pits tend to have slope, like long flat slopes, so you know, I just want to get out to my knees, and where that weed is, and I want to be fishing just beyond the side of the weeds, and I want to be sinking them down a little bit and then just working them. So the best way to fish these are with twitches on the rod. So either on the rod, you can fish them off the reel as well. So one turn at a time, and they're going to glide off the center line. They're going to go left and right constantly all the way back. Now there are 2 or 3 different types of retrieve that I would employ on these. You've got your fast twitches. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, very similar to how I would fish like a walk the dog on a surface bait. Short, sharp hits of the rod. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Get that high frequency cadence to them, and they will come just off the center line, and you can fish them quite quick. You can fish them slightly slower, and you can also put longer pauses in by hitting the rod, and you can glide out to the side, and you can really experiment with this. You can actually whack them quite hard, and they can go right out to the side. Do be careful though, there's only so hard you can hit these before they end up gliding so far back that the trebles are going to get caught on your main line or caught on your trace, and then you waste a cast. All right, so don't over hit them, but you can hit them hard enough just to get that lure working, so it's really saying, here I am. The third one, and I'll explain this in a second, but the third one is going to be, I often fish it with a few short, so I'm walking the dog like this. If I haven't had a bite for a while, you know, first 50% of the retrieve, I'll often pause for a second, and then I'll give it 1, 2, 3, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 3 or 4 or 5 hard hits. And what that does is that can really instigate. It really fires those rattles going around. When you hit it quite hard, it doesn't just stay. If you hit it gently, you'll see that these stay quite flat. If you hit it really hard, they roll slightly, they come up in the water, and basically what I'm doing is I'm kind of ringing that dinner bell. If I haven't had a bite on that first 50% of the cast, just walking the dog nice and slow, I'll often try and whoop, 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 here I am, come and get me, plenty of noise, see if I can aggravate them onto the hook, all right? So that's a really, really good one. You can really mix it up throughout your casts, but the one thing I always say is, number one, let the fish tell you what they want on the day. They will generally be in a certain mood. If they're in a little bit of a cagey mood, just small twitches, walking the dog over the top of the weed will be ideal. If they're in a bit more of an aggressive mood, they will come from large distances to come and eat this bait, but they ain't going to come from large distances if they can't see it because it's not flashing or making a huge amount of noise. That's where that kind of hit, 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 and they'll flash loads and then go back to that kind of walk the dog, and that's really drawing those fish in from a long, long distance. In terms of water clarity, they are generally quite a visual bait. I certainly wouldn't be using them in less than about a foot of visibility, 18 inches of visibility. So for me, they're a cracking bait. They're also not super realistic enough, like say the Hypertease glide bait that I also use quite a lot, which has got really realistic fins, perfectly realistic body shape to it. I would generally fish these between 18 inches and about 4 foot of visibility. If it's clearer than that, I tend to go to the Hypertease because it's more realistic. If it's more coloured than that, as a visual bait, I would probably just select something a little bit different. Maybe a crankbait, more vibrations. Got to remember this has got flat sides, so it's got flash to it, which is visual. It has got rattles in it, but it's not like a chatterbait or a crankbait where you've got that high vibration, firing out vibration. Brrr. You know, in that low visibility water, I'd probably be thinking about something like the larger size bass bite that we do, or some of the larger crankbaits that we do. Anyway, so yeah, you can also fish these on a straight wind. A quick straight wind just gives them a little S-curve. The quicker it is, the narrower that S-curve is. The slower it is, the more you'll get a little bit of a wider S-curve. But if I'm honest, I don't really catch a huge amount of them on a straight wind. Again, it will catch, but it's just not the best way that these baits are designed. And arguably, if it's the type of day where they do really want to chase a quick bait, arguably I'd put a different bait on and outfish this style. All right, so it's horses for courses, but at the right time of year, in the right situations, fishing shallow, fishing weedy, often in the spring, early summer, this is the time of year and the conditions that I would use that. Clarity, like I said, 18 inches to probably 4 foot or so. In terms of colour, I do, again, partly that's dictated by the clarity of the water, but a big distinction for me, and I put this in a recent video, is the difference between no orange belly and orange belly. And this seems to be with any bait that you fish shallow above the line of sight. So the opposite of that would be, for example, sometimes when the pike are really lethargic in the depths of winter, they will not come more than, especially if it's in the middle of the day when they're not in a feeding mood, they will not come more than a few feet to eat a bait. All right, so if I'm fishing, say, in 20 foot of water and I can see a few pike and they're down very low, this isn't the style of bait that I would select. But also, the baits that I would select, I would be looking to try and get it down onto their eye level or just above their eye level within a foot or so, and make it a really easy meal. But for this is an above the eye line type bait, all right? So it typically works best when they're looking to ambush or looking to feed, looking to hunt. They'll come out of the weeds to come and get it. And because of that, this distinction, orange belly versus no orange belly, is a really important point. I actually said on a previous video, a lot of the time I rummaged through my box and I really couldn't care less to a certain degree which colour, which main colour I'm pulling out. Sometimes I'm selecting just on the basis of orange versus no orange. And it's one of those things which is, again, who knows what type of day it's going to be, who knows exactly how the light's penetrating in the water, exactly the clarity of the water, but I have noticed a big difference. Sometimes you want days with no orange, you just want something a little bit more plainer, so I'd go for something like this, the realistic roach. Other days I'm looking for an orange belly. Most people know I'm a huge fan of bling perch, all right, with that nice orange belly. But similarly, if it was, the water clarity was down to sort of 18 inches and I was looking to try and get their attention, I'd fish it a little bit quicker because it's so unrealistic. But again, we've got that orange belly and really kind of work that lure to get them to come up and get it. In terms of rods, just if you've got a long pike rod, and by long I mean anything 8 foot or more, excellent. These cast like an absolute bullet. So you don't necessarily need a really long rod for distance casting, but you will struggle to make that action in the rod, because once you're over 8 foot or so, it starts getting a bit heavier and a bit more cumbersome. So I would recommend, if you've already got a pike rod and you want to try these out, and it's 8 foot or 8'6" or 9 foot, work it on the reel. One turn, and you'll be walking the dog like that, just on the reel. I don't point the rod directly at the bait, because you can get some savage takes with these, and I've been bust off in the past just from having the rod too direct. There's no give in the rod, there's no give in the braid, there's no give in the wire, and a knot goes or something goes, because big fish can hit it so hard. So at the same time, I don't want my rod round at, say, a 90-degree angle to the lure, because it's the type of lure that you're hitting and then leaving bits of slack in it. All right, when you've got those bits of slack in and you've got a rod at a very, very pronounced angle, you're always going to lose sensitivity. So I'm tending to have just off, pointing straight at them. I want it a slight angle so that I'm as direct as possible, because I want to know every single time a pike comes up and touches their nose onto it. I want to know when they're investigating it. I want to know when they just touch and mouth it. I want to know when they're coming up. I want to feel every bite of everything. I want to know when I'm feeling grass. Depending on how many I'm counting down, I want to know exactly where the grass or the weed is. I want to be, and you can get all of that feedback if you're using braid and you're almost directly pointing the rod at the bait. But if you've got too much angle in your rod, trying to work it sideways, it just gets lost. A lot of the vibrations get lost, a lot of the feel gets lost. All right, so that's my top tip, just off center, especially if you're going to use it on the reel. If you're going to use, because these cast like a bullet, you don't need a mega long rod, and a traditional pike jerkbait rod, it's going to be around that 6'6" mark. But again, anywhere between 6'6" and 7'6", I'd recommend working it on the rod, yeah, and just picking the slack up with your reel, working it on the rod, and then you get a lot of that feedback. When you're working them on the reel, get less of the feedback of exactly how this is working, and how far it's coming off that center line. Whereas with the rod, you can be a little bit more controlled, but you're going to struggle to do that with a long rod. So make sure you're 6'6" to 7'6" on a shorter rod. Then you can work it in smaller increments if you want to. Yeah, heavy braid, use whatever braid you want. Again, it doesn't make a huge amount of difference because it's not a deep bait. If it was a deep bait, I'd probably be looking to try and get everything as balanced as possible, and try and find a fine but strong braid that can allow me to get down. But for these types of baits, like I said, they're shallow baits, they're above the eye line baits. Braid, you could go pretty heavy if you wanted to, wouldn't be a problem. So yeah, 10 and 12 is my favourites, especially the 10 as a competition lure, the 12 as a bigger lure. We do it in a 15 as well. I know the chaps over in Scandinavia fish the 15s quite a lot. It's just a bit too big for us here in the UK. We don't tend to work baits that big here. I mean, some of you might do if you're out and out pikers with super heavy kit, but for me, I like to try and fish for bites. I like to fish for everything from 2-pounders to 20-pounders or upwards. And so the 10 and the 12 really covers 90% of that for me. So there you go, guys. A few tips on kit, a few tips on when I would use it, a few tips on retrieve. But yeah, they are an amazing lure. The last thing that I probably would say is I had a session in about March, I think it was. Was it March? It probably was about March, end of March. And this was an absolute killer bait. I'd caught quite a lot of fish up to that, but it was just one of those days where chucking it out, I was fishing from the shore, and I caught up to about 90 plus centimetres. I think I had about 15 or so pike in a day. It was really good fishing, and I caught almost every single one of them on the Westin SWIM. It was a different venue the next week, but on the very next week, it was 5 days later, I've gone there thinking, oh, I'm going to absolutely smash it on the SWIM. Never had a bite on it. And I had one plastic left over in my box. I had one other crankbait. I could catch on a few other baits. I could not get a bite on this bait. So it can be a little bit Marmite as well. So just you know, experiment with it. Definitely make sure you've got a couple of baits in your box, because this is the type of bait that sometimes you might not even get a bite on it, but other times it will outfish everything else. So yeah, keep an eye on that. But there we go, guys. I'll probably wrap this one up now. That's just a little one on my learnings on how to fish the Westin SWIM. Spent the last 6 or 8 months really kind of getting to grips with them, and it's been really pleasurable because it's been a massive learning curve for me. But again, you guys out there, I'm learning. Every day's a school day. I'm learning all the time too. So if you guys have got any comments on ways that you fished this style of bait before, jerk baits, glide baits, I'd absolutely love to hear it. So please pop it in the comments below. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up, press the like or subscribe button. Yeah, the channel's going really well. Looking forward, I'm back in the kit room. You've probably seen that I've, you know, been tidying the kit room up and making it a bit snazzy lately. So yeah, really enjoying making these videos again. So press the like if you like them. Until then, I'll see you on the next one.